Kupchick. I'm the first Selectwoman of Fairfield, and I've done a couple of these for different areas in our town because people had questions regarding 8-30G developments and didn't particularly understand the entire statute and things of that nature. And we're getting a lot more of it coming into the office. And on top of that, I'm also seeing a lot of questions come in about legislation pending in Hartford. So I thought it would be a good idea to host this forum for our community to have an opportunity to listen a little and to ask questions. So I'm gonna just say thank you to our panelists who came on. If you didn't see the flyer, we have a State Senator Tony Hwang here. We have Representative Laura Devlin, State Representative Cristin McCarthy Vahey, and Representative Jennifer Leeper. And on the town side, we have Mark Barnhart, who's our Director of Economic Development, Jim Wendt, who's our Director of Planning and Zoning, who are both intricately involved in these types of issues in our town. And we have the chairman of the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, who's seen a lot of action on our Planning and Zoning Commission regarding 8-30G developments. And so I thought it would be important for them in our delegation to be here for this conversation. So I could have what I've done in the past was have Mark Barnhart discuss a little bit about the 8-30G statute, what it is and how it works. And then I had Jim Wendt and Matt Wagner talk a little bit about their experiences. But I know we are time constrained. If people want to have that, we can do that, or we can go right to questions. I'll leave it up to the panelists.
If I may, Madam
Sure.
First Selectwoman, this is State Senator Tony Hwang. I think it's important for us to hear from town leaders and the town perspectives, and also member of our Affordable Housing Task Force. Look, we live these kind of proposals, particularly for Representative McCarthy Vahey. He and I, as the chair, she's the chair, and the ranking of planning and zoning, the various bills that we have. But I think it's most important for us to hear from our planning and zoning chair, Mark, the economic development, and members of the Affordable Housing Task Force to share with things that you have done as a town so that we can have some background, but also what some of these proposals, which you have done a really good job in articulating, and give us insight and give us your thoughts for us to be able to properly represent you up in Hartford. If that's okay through you, Madam First Selectwoman.
That's fine. Mark, do you want to talk a little just about?
Maybe I can talk a little bit about the work of the Affordable Housing Committee, what we've done, and what
Yes.
we're already embarking on, an update to our housing plan. So, you know, the town has had an Affordable Housing Committee or task force since the mid-1980s, and one of the first communities in the state of Connecticut to do so, and produced an affordable housing plan back in 1988. Again, probably one of the first communities in the state of Connecticut to do so. And since that time, you know, has been engaged. It's a largely advocacy group, largely engaged in terms of supporting affordable housing, or more precisely promoting housing choice, housing diversity, housing options in Fairfield. And so the town has done a number of things over the years, both serving as a developer of affordable housing, doing some very innovative things like doing property swaps to encourage certain types of affordable housing, and, you know, developing its own property for that purpose. In 2014, the Affordable Housing Committee updated its affordable housing plan using a state grant, which we got with the help of our legislative delegation up in Hartford. We used that to produce an update to our plan, and in that report, there were a series of 11 action steps that the town could do on its own to help promote more housing diversity here and more housing opportunities for Fairfield residents. And I'm happy to report that we made substantial progress in the intervening years. So we have, since that report was adopted, created more than 100 affordable units here in town. We are well on our way to achieving a moratorium status, which we can talk about a little bit as it relates to 830G. And some of the things that we did working in concert with the Planning and Zoning Commission were to enact an inclusionary zoning regulation that requires any development of 10 or more units to set aside at least 10% of the housing as affordable housing within that development. That way it can be developed naturally as part of the private development process and scattered throughout town, so it's not imposing a burden on any particular area or neighborhood. The commission also created an inclusionary zoning regulation that requires any new construction or building addition that doesn't otherwise provide for affordable housing to set aside or provide a supplemental fee that goes into a dedicated housing trust fund. And that housing trust fund currently has a balance of roughly $675,000 at the present time, which the town can then use to help promote or create affordable housing opportunities here in town. In addition to that, again, working with the commission and with groups like the Fairfield Senior Advocates and Fair Plan, the commission also amended its regulations as it relates to accessory dwelling units to make it easier for those units to be established in town. And so we have more than 200 formal or legal accessory dwelling units in town. We're looking to grow that inventory. And while that may not contribute formally to our affordable housing inventory, it does provide a modicum of housing options for especially seniors that may be a cost burden and living in town looking for different options. So all those things do help contribute to our affordable housing inventory. As I mentioned, we are working towards a moratorium. The state statutes allow for communities to apply for and receive a moratorium under 830G if you accumulate sufficient number of housing unit equivalency points that are equal to 2% of the number of housing units in town as of the last decennial census. In the case of Fairfield, we need 433 points, and we are just shy of that mark at the present time. We have about 56 points left to go based on our projections in order for us to apply. And what's important here is that we can only count those units that are either newly deed restricted or placed into service after July 1 of 1990. So in order for us to count units under construction, we have to wait for them to be built and placed into service or occupied before we can actually count those units. So we have a number of projects that have either been approved or under construction that will count towards our moratorium points, but we're only able to count those units once they actually get a T or certificate of occupancy. So I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but that's just an overview of where we are. I should say that the Affordable Housing Committee, because there is a state requirement that communities update their affordable housing plans every 5 years. We are currently embarking on a new affordable housing plan update. We just retained a consultant to assist us and work with the Planning and Zoning Commission and Affordable Housing Committee to do that. And we hope to deliver that plan to the Board of Selectmen by early next year. And with that, I'll defer to others.
Thank you, Mark. So I think that gives a nice perspective. When we had done that on the prior neighborhood meetings we've had discussing this statute, I know so many residents in our community don't really understand it until it comes to their neighborhood, and then they want to know a lot about it. So it's always good to have that perspective, to hear what it is, to hear what the town has done and continues to do. And we are working very hard to try to increase our own affordable housing that is being built through the town. But again, it's like the dog chasing its tail. We're trying really hard to get there. And as Mark said, if every single thing that has passed through the planning and zoning was CO'd and built and CO'd, we would be able to apply for the moratorium. But we're just not there yet. And in this period of time, these applications just keep coming and coming. So I would like to, if we don't mind, if no one minds, I think I would like to open it up because I think it'll spur conversation and it'll allow us to all have a dialogue. I'm going to go to this chat here. And Bob asks a question, the Connecticut General Assembly presenters, in your opinion, why has the state zoning reform become such a wedge issue? And what is one concrete action you can take to help achieve progress towards state and local zoning reform? So I'm going to open that up to the delegation. Senator Hwang, do you want to?
Absolutely. It's a very emotionally charged issue. And Madam First Selectwoman, when you and I were working together in the Housing Committee, we did approach and try to create solutions for the current A30G statute. And that was nearly a 5-year journey. And indeed, we did make some statutory changes. In fact, it was the only bill that overrode the 8 years of Governor Malloy's legacy. But that being said, the current proposal reflects the failure of A30G. It just did not meet the solutions. And let me be clear, we have a critical housing need in every part of our state, not only in our suburbs, but in our urban settings, in our rural communities. And I believe, as what's mentioned here earlier by Mark, the incredible efforts that's been made by the town of Fairfield and many other communities. Can more be done? Absolutely. But it can only be reaching our goals, a collaborative effort between neighborhoods, the state, local, and federal entities to make it all work. The idea of the current proposals, why it's so emotionally charged, is the premise that the state has enabling powers on zoning and planning, and that they are granting that to our local authorities, which is a premise that I find difficult to accept, because the idea of the state, Hartford, and its advocates, well-intentioned advocates, knowing every nuance and unique aspect of each of the respective local communities better than our local and planning and zoning boards, conversation entities, economic development leaders, is a false premise. The idea that we should all work together needs to be the premise. But unfortunately, the bills that are being proposed right now by the legislative majority is one where one size fits all, and the state has a better idea than local efforts that we're undertaking. So, we can talk a little more about that, but my overall perspective is the reason it's been termed as a wedge issue because it's deeply personal. It's one about local control of planning and zoning authorities and conservation, as well as individual personal property rights. The emotion of individuals who have done everything right in taking care of their home and property and did everything right in following the rules of their local community can literally, under currently A30G and the current proposals that are being discussed in the legislative body, can override people's personal property rights. That's deeply emotional, and you can see that in the reactions of many people that we've interacted with. And I welcome the perspective of other of my colleagues as well. And I want to thank you very much, Madam First Selectwoman, for having this opportunity for us as a legislative body representing you in Hartford to hear the voices of the people that we truly want to represent.
Thank you, Senator. Does anyone, well, I just want to say for the record, Senator Hwang is the ranking member on the Planning and Development Committee that a lot of proposals that affect us in this area went through, and Cristin McCarthy Vahey is the chairwoman, co-chairwoman of the Planning and Development Committee. Cristin, do you want to jump in?
Yes, and I'm more of a Zoom gal myself, and I want to make sure you can hear me, Madam First Selectwoman.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I listened to Jennifer Carpenter's instructions, and I called in, so that's why you see the earbuds in my ears. I know it looks kind of funny, but it's, I guess, a look we're all used to these days. First of all, I just want to thank you, Mark, Jim, Matt, and the delegation members for joining in this conversation, and for all the people who are joining us and who are paying attention and caring about these issues. Particularly, I give a special shout out to Matt and to our volunteer members of the TP&Z and our ZBA, the people who are our community members who help us implement the federal and state and local frameworks that help us plan for our future. To get back to Bob's question,
So Cristin, if
I'm
you wouldn't
gonna-
mind, can we try to encompass that? And also, I'm gonna just jump in and throw in, it said, can legislators walk us through the bills they are considering in Hartford and how they impact Fairfield? So if you could kind of put that into with the previous question, and then we'll bring it all around.
I'll do my best. I don't want to filibuster the conversation.
I know, I'm
I'm
trying to
happy-
open it up so we,
Because I could probably talk for a long time about all that, Madam First Selectwoman. But so the first question, just to get to that, and thanks to everyone for the questions. You know, I think that the idea of land use as something that is deeply personal is true. And I think it's also something that's absolutely communal, because we know that the way we regulate our land is something that impacts one another. And when I think about, you know, talking about the proposals in Hartford and some of that, there are a lot of different things on the table. And I'm really interested in us having an opportunity tonight to hopefully talk about some of those specific items. When we talk about the state enabling legislation, that's literally the name of the 8-2 statute. And I know earlier Mark talked about 830G. 8-2 is what's known as the state enabling legislation. Much as the federal government gives powers to the state gives powers to the municipalities. And in fact, nothing in these proposals is going to change the fact that ultimately our local municipalities and those boards will have to write our regulations and implement any state law. I often use the example of curriculum, and I know we have a couple of former Board of Ed members here on the call. When we have a bill right now in Hartford to define what is in federal or in our state curriculum, but it is the municipalities, our boards of ed, who actually write that curriculum. Much as the same is true with the 8-2 piece. I think I want to touch on something else that Senator Hwang said in terms of individual property rights. Ironically, some of the things that are being proposed in Hartford are in some other places in the country being supported by folks who do believe in in less regulation and in more ability for people to do as they choose with their property. So I think that this is a really important issue, because as long as there are humans on the planet, we're going to be talking about how we use our land and how we share space with one another and how we decide who, what, when, and where we choose to develop and change. And I think there's one other piece to all in terms of change. Lots of folks in our hearings, and Senator Hwang and I have had an opportunity to spend dozens of hours together, and we've heard from hundreds of people around our state and through our online hearings, but also in person and in lots of forums. And I think there's often conversation and some folks who get upset when we talk about fear of change. And rather than talking about fear of change, I think part of these proposals are looking at the inevitability of change. And just to tie this back to one thing Mark said, and then I'll stop because I know other folks want to talk, but I can happily talk more about the proposals. Mark talked about Fairfield's history of having an affordable housing plan, which is tremendous. And when I was a select person, I helped found our bike pedestrian committee. And I went to another community who had a longtime committee, and they said the first thing you have to do is have a plan. And what I loved hearing about from Mark is the last plan that we had action steps for our community. And the community didn't just have the plan, our community took the plan and put it into action. And I think that's really, really important that Fairfield is ahead of so many other communities in that. But I'll leave it there for now. I'm happy to talk more. I want to let other folks have a chance to talk, but then I'm happy to talk more about the specifics that are still alive. Some of the bills have died.
okay, so I want to open it up to the other legislators too, but I just want to make sure I'm not missing.
Thank you. So can I jump in?
Yes, I just, they said, could you give specifics how these bills would remove local control And then another one, some links are provided, but then elaborate on how personal property rights will be protected in the proposed bills. The language embedded in these bills says otherwise. Do we? Okay. Listen, I want to let Laura speak and then Jen speak, but I think that it would be helpful, because Senator Hwang and Cristin are both members of the committee that had a lot of this. If you could maybe talk about the ones that are still alive and maybe counterpoint about what you think, if you think it's good and if you don't think it's good and why. Maybe that'll be helpful.
So first of all, let me say thank you for hosting this. I know that we were contacted by local residents, constituents who were very concerned. They're hearing all sorts of things about this and don't really understand what's the big picture, what's the real picture. Can we filter out the sound bites and actually get to some of the facts? And this is a challenging issue. It is certainly an emotional issue. And I think one of the things is that the 830G statute has failed. And what we're seeing even in the town of Fairfield, to reach a imposed threshold, Mark, what are we getting? 900 apartments that are coming into Fairfield? It does so little it certainly brings new apartments that are market rate, that is very expensive. But that really outweighs the affordable housing and does so little to incent or create or help build home ownership, which we hear so much is so important for intergenerational wealth. So there seems to be all of these things coming, from different directions with different objectives. And what would be really ideal is for everybody to sit down, look at what exists, look at some of the proposals and say, what makes sense? But one of the things with this legislation, I don't serve on the Planning and Development Committee, but there is an organization who is very active in promoting this legislation, and they have an omnibus bill that did go, and what I mean by that has multiple pieces that did go to the Planning and Development Committee. But the way that our legislature works sometimes is that the majority has also taken many of those pieces and submitted them as separate bills through multiple committees. So they are hitting education, housing, planning and development, finance, transportation. It's unbelievable in terms of the breadth. And I think the big theme is that, one of the beauties of our state, we don't have counties, we have 169 unique and different towns or cities. They might be rural communities, they can be bustling suburban communities, they can be our cities that we desperately need to revitalize. And what all of this legislation seems to seek is sort of a Hartford-driven, one-size-fits-all approach that either the Office of Policy and Management, or maybe the Department of Transportation, or the Department of Housing is going to tell our towns the framework with they have to work in. And it is said commonly that, oh no, towns have a choice, this isn't being taken away. But if you're told that you can do A, B, or C, that's it, A, B, or C, is that really a choice? Is that really freedom for our towns to decide what is the right thing to do? There were some very controversial pieces in this big chunk of legislation, such as if you imagine our downtown in Fairfield, right, on top of the 700 to 900 apartments that are coming very soon, there would be as of right development, which is code for no public hearings, just build what you want for multifamily housing within a half a mile of a train station, or at least 50% of the land within a half a mile of a train station. Or consider Black Rock Turnpike, big commercial area, right? As of right, no public hearings, build whatever you want within a half a mile. So, and also parking is a big deal. I was on a forum this morning with Rep. McCarthy Vahey, actually about our library, not to digress, but it was about the strategic plan for our library, which is such an incredible asset to our town. And one of the first comments was, fix the parking. And these proposals also try to take away any parking requirements, which just means it's kind of a free-for-all. So there's some important pieces. I look forward to Senator Hwang and Rep. McCarthy Vahey sort of outlining more specifically what's in this legislation. And at some point, maybe we should have a document that is point by point, like, what does this stuff mean? Translate it from the legislative language into lay people's regular terminology so that they can understand. And I know there is one organization who has done that with a point of view, but maybe we want to look at it a little bit more holistically. So
Thank you, Representative Devlin. As always, you're very lively and on point.
passionate about it.
Jennifer, Representative Leeper, do you want to jump in and offer some comments?
Happy to. Thank you so much, Brenda, for bringing us all together. And I think I'm going to try to actually answer that first question that Bob asked about this being a wedge issue and what we can do to help move past that. And I think this type of forum with all of us here together is exactly the type of thing we can do to help break down some of the myth on both sides, like Rep. Devlin was just mentioning, and really get to the facts of what does this mean for our community? What does it mean for our state? We all recognize that we have an affordable housing crisis. We're 130,000 units short of where we should be for people to have access to affordable housing, and that we know right here in our community, it is a relevant and urgent need for our seniors, amongst other groups, to have access to more affordable housing. And as has been described, our community has taken that seriously. And we have taken many steps to try to integrate more affordable housing into our community. I think part of why this has become such a wedge issue is there's really been, I think, across all sectors over the past many, many years, a breakdown in trust. And so depending on what your view is or your tribe might be, depends on whose voices you trust. And it also impacts whose voices you might inherently not trust. And I think we've been seeing a lot of that. We have people going around holding regional rallies about local control, telling people this is going to destroy your personal property rights. That's terrifying. We all have almost all of our capital tied up in our homes. And not only is it our biggest financial asset, it's deeply personal. Having served on the Board of Ed, I'm often telling people who reach out to me, I know there is nothing that strikes at our hearts more than our children and our homes. And so this is one of those issues that is so deeply personal. And so I am grateful for the opportunity for all of us to come together and try to break down some of the myth on both sides, because we all live in Connecticut and Fairfield by choice. We've talked about this before, all from other states and selected to live here because it's such a wonderful place. And we want to ensure that it continues to be a wonderful place. And we all agree affordable housing is important. And so what are the actual steps we can take to make sure we are bringing more affordable housing into our community in a way that is fitting? And I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, so there were two things brought up. Is that the Senate, Tony? All right, so two bills, HB 6611 was brought up here in the chat, and then Senate Bill 1024. Can we talk about these?
So why don't, I don't know, Senator Hwang, I'm having a little bit of internet issues, I think. Some of your videos keep coming in and out. Senator Hwang, are you still there?
I am here, but we are about to go cast a vote. So if you can forgive me, I will actually have to exit for a few minutes.
Okay.
So thank you. It's the peril of legislative session right now. So I apologize. I'll be right back.
Okay. Thanks, Tony.
You're doing your job. You're doing your job. So, Madam First Selectwoman, if I may just speak directly to some of the bills back to you had asked me before, and I wanted to just let other folks have a chance to speak. So a couple things, and I went through this with a resident recently. I always recommend to folks to go on the Connecticut General Assembly webpage, and at the bottom of the page, there's a little box that says bills, and you can enter the bill number into that box, and it takes you to what's called the bill page. And I'll share bill numbers in just a moment. On that page is what's called the bill analysis. There are three things that can help you learn more directly. This is going to the source. The file copy on the bill is the actual bill language itself. That's legislative language. So to Representative Devlin's point, the bill analysis, which is written by attorneys, and they break that down into more plain language so that we all can, who are non-lawyers, can read it and understand. And there are bill summaries and bill analyses on each of the bill pages. There's also on the bill page what's called a JF report, just so that you know those are written by the clerks of the various committees. So some of them are better than others. They're not written by attorneys. They're summaries of testimony and information. So I would recommend folks, go there directly. But I also recommend that people, if you're on one side of the issue, to listen to what the other side says and go to the various websites of the different groups who are involved. So a couple of bills. Madam First Selectwoman, you mentioned 6611, which just to go back for a minute to what Rep. Devlin said, in committee, we hear bill ideas from individual residents, from advocacy groups, from fellow legislators, and in our committee in Planning and Development, and Senator Hwang he's heard me say this a whole bunch of times because I shared this in committee. We had a number of bills that came to us through and recommended to us through various organizations who have worked together. So one bill that we have, 6611, was a group called Open Communities Alliance was the main proponent. And in the legislature, the majority leader of the House was the main proponent. That bill was referred to the Judiciary Committee and heard or on the agenda for the committee on Monday. And the bill was what's called held, which means the bill died in committee. So you may have read some news reports that say, well, it can be resurrected in other vehicles, so to speak. I want to just clarify that because a lot of people have been talking about dummy bills and other vehicles. And I was going to call you Representative Kupchick. Forgive me, Madam First Selectwoman.
Senator Hwang does that, actually.
But our First Selectwoman knows, and as the rest of the delegation, I had a bill yesterday about birth certificates, and we had what was called a strike all amendment, which was germane to the bill, which means it was relevant to the bill itself. So the Fair Share proposal had a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. I've talked to some of you. Mr. Wagner was good enough to spend time talking with me, other TP&Z members as well. And that bill would essentially a number close to the number that Rep. Leeper talked about, a regional fair share number of housing units that each region would have to create and then broken down by town. Now, again, the bill has died in the Judiciary Committee. I can tell you as the chair of the Planning and Development Committee, which is where the bill originated, it's not my expectation that that bill will somehow magically resurrect itself. So that's 6611. If you want, I can go on if I may. Is that okay?
If I may.
Tony jump in a little, and Laura, go ahead.
So I just wanted to jump in, and Cristin, I appreciate what you said, but at least what's reported in the press, because that bill was from the majority leader in the House, and he has stated it's not over. So you know how things work in the legislature, things can creep in anywhere, but it sounded to me like he was committed to keeping that policy moving forward.
Well, I can say that the bill as it is currently written is not going to move forward in that form.
If I may, I think it's important to have the matrix that was suggested, and we will provide that information in a contrast, but the various activist organizations, and let people make the determination. But I do want to reiterate that it is important to note that no bill is dead in the General Assembly till the end of session. And the idea that bills that have been rejected or amended by the legislative process could be resurrected and implemented in dummy bills is very real. I believe the House just implemented a strike-all bill on telehealth that was placed into a totally unrelated bill that was supposed to be a study that became a comprehensive telehealth bill that we all supported. But nevertheless, the resurrection of concepts and ideas that have existed through 4 different committees, from transportation to housing to finance to the housing, the planning and development committee, all of it is very real. The other important concept, because of the significant Democratic majority in both chambers of the Senate and the House, I do believe if people in our community and local leaders are deeply impacted or opposed to these policies, that they clearly let your legislators know. Because the reality is, you are fortunate to have the chair of planning and development. And for myself as the ranking Senate member, we will be on the forefront of these issues. We need to hear from you. And it is not just simply enough to say, oops, the bill is up for a vote and we're going to vote for it, but we're not going to vote for it. We're going to vote no, because we're going to listen to our community. You have leaders that are at the forefront of these issues. And even if you vote no, the bill by the simple majority becomes effective. The towns and its residents are going to have to live with the results. So if there's nothing else I ask of our legislators and for residents and town leaders, we need to implore our legislative leaders not just simply to say no on the vote. It can't come up for a vote. But the collaboration needs to be, look, we all agree there's a critical need for housing everywhere in the state. It's not just our suburbs, it includes our cities, includes our rural setting. And the only way we can create solutions is to have a collaborative effort with neighborhoods, with local government, with leaders that have demonstrated incredible vision already, and state and federal leaders. That is the only way we can do it. So I would say, let's go back to the drawing board, really work hard through this summer and this updated legislative session to get all parties and all shareholders involved and create a plan that is a true collaborative effort, not an agenda driven by specific interest groups with good intentions, with all due respect, but to incorporate feedback. So my offer and my suggestion to our legislative leaders in this is, these bills cannot be called, because if it does, even if you vote no, it's going to pass. And when it gets called and it gets passed and it irreparably changes our community, our towns and our neighborhoods, there should be an accountability. There should be a sense of responsibility.
So let me just jump in a second. All right. So we could debate these bills all day long. And I just want to say, as a 9-year legislator, that is 100% true. Bills are stripped clean and new language is thrown in and voted on like that. It happens. We all know it happens. So let's just be clear on that. What I'm trying to think of as a former legislator who served on the Housing Committee and tried to amend 8-30G, which has been extraordinarily detrimental to our community. It is not given or attributed to an increased amount of affordable housing in any measurable way. It is the tail wagging the dog. And we just, every time 100 or 200 units go up, a small amount of housing goes in, and we are now have even higher amount of residents. Now our rate has to go up. It's a never ending cycle. You never get there. And let's be clear. I mean, the medium area income, that's not true affordable housing for a lot of these places. And we're not really making a dent in the effort to build more affordable units when we have to have so many more market rate units added to our town. So I've always been against that. And because I thought the whole bill should be scrapped and we should start over. So what my question is, a leader of this town who listens to everybody in all the districts, is when we are trying so hard as a town to just even get to the point where we can reach a moratorium, and Mark went over an overview of all of this work that we're doing to try to achieve this, why is there any bill in the legislature, any bill trying to mandate more things on towns when towns can't even get a chance to get their affordable housing plans up and start working them? We're not even having a chance to reach the goal of the current legislation. So as a leader of this town, and we have a lot of members on here who want to hear why are there any bills being proposed on dezoning? Why?
So if I may jump in to, let's talk about the bills themselves and planning and development, since that's really what so much of the angst and frustration and concern and excitement and a lot of different emotions across the spectrum that people have. But I'd like to talk about 830G. As you know, having served on the Housing Committee with Senator Hwang, that is generally the purview of the Housing Committee. So the bills that we are talking about in planning and development relate to 8-2. 8-2 is what I would say the umbrella under which land use, all land use, affordable housing, commercial development, residential real estate, all of it falls under that statute. And in fact, if we passed none of the bills related to 8-2, or if we passed all of them, 830G would still be in effect. So
Correct.
The conversation about 830G is an important one. And I think it's something that, I've said many times before, it's a blunt instrument. And, some people would argue that there has been some affordable housing development in our state as a result. And others, like those of us in Fairfield who have been, addressing this issue for years, understand the difficulty and the struggle with what 830G has done, because primarily the hand is to the developer. The fair share plan, which again, I hear you, yes, bills can reappear. I'm saying to you as the chair of the Planning and Development Committee, I have no expectation sitting here today that 6611 as it's written in its current form is somehow going to magically reappear. I understand that you can doubt what I'm saying and all that. The point that I'm wanting to make about fair share is that the idea was to put the power and the control in the town's hands in terms of coming up with the plan and working towards. You can't force a developer to develop, right? But you are asking the town to do that. But again, I'd rather talk for a minute about a couple of the other bills that we have in committees. And I want to talk about bringing shareholders to the table and open public process. 6107 is one of the House bills that has been in the House for 3 years. It's gone through 3 years of public hearings. 2 years ago, we passed it out of the House with bipartisan support from members of the delegation in Fairfield, House members. And last year, that bill passed out of the Planning and Development Committee. It does a few things. It reorganizes the zoning statute so that it makes it a little bit more clear and accessible for our volunteer commissioners, as well as legally speaking. It removes the use of the word character. It doesn't remove the use of specific terms like historic, site plant or site setbacks, soil, height, density, etc. Those things are there in terms of the specifics, but that bill would remove the word character. It would require that communities affirmatively further federal fair housing, and it would create a working group. Talked about the affordable housing plan requirements that's now in place under what's 830J of the statute. And that working group would be charged with helping communities figure out how they would be in compliance. Because right now we just say, hey, come up with an affordable housing plan, and Fairfield does a great job, but a new community doing it for the first time might not know exactly what's in there. So that group would come up with how communities would actually be in compliance. So that's 6107. There are two bills in the Senate. 1026 is a bill that
Representative McCarthy Vahey, if I may add as a follow-up, as the ranking member on the committee, it's important to note that 6107 was indeed voted on this year. And as you articulated, that similar bill to this was raised in the past years. But it is important to note why these kind of meetings are important, because that bill raised in the past few years did not have the level of dialogue, the level of engagement, the level of transparency, of real input from shareholders. So as a result, it's important to note, you can refer back, but this year in committee, after nearly over 24 hours of public hearing input and nearly 70% of people still not getting a chance to voice their concerns, the vote of 6107 in committee this year was 17-9. So there was a real concern in regards to the removal of the word character and the convening of a working group that does not incorporate any local leadership in regards to some of the formulation of enable zoning. But it also based a premise that enable zoning powers come from the state, and they grant that to our local municipalities. That is the premise of 6107. Look, we worked on many other components. It is important to talk about why it's so important and powerful to have these kind of dialogues, to have the sense of transparency that is needed in the current debate right now. Not having this conversation would impose laws and impact our community that befalls our residents and say, what the heck just happened? I think this opportunity to raise out the contrast that you just pointed out, where this year the vote was 17-9, and there was over thousands of people that wanted to articulate their viewpoint. So again, these kind of conversations are necessary, but you can't base on what happened in the past, because ultimately you can look back to the tapes on that. That conversation of comparable bills lasted 15 minutes of debate in the committee, not the 24-hour you had this year, when greater transparency and awareness was being promoted. So again, I wanted to clarify that, because we can point to past years, but ultimately this year, it's important that people are engaged.
And it's important for me to point out that the reason it was in the committee for the third year in a row was after 2 years of a fair housing public working group process that was open to the public. And you're right, there is more of a highlight. I think this really goes back to the first question that we had. This year, there were a number of other proposals. And I would, say that the other bill that has 8-2 elements, or a lot of 8-2 elements, which is the 1024 bill. But to your point, Senator Hwang, you're absolutely right. We have had more engagement involvement because of the online format and the ability for people to engage that way, which, yes, I think we all would have liked to have been able to sit. It would have been literally at least who were there. But I think I'd like to also just say there are two other bills in the Senate, 1026 and 1024. 1026 would require training of our zoning commissioners, and 1024 also is a lot of 8-2 pieces, but it does a number of other things, and I'm happy to talk more about that. Senator Hwang is as well, I'm sure, but I see, Madam First Selectwoman, you are looking to jump in, so I'll stop.
So no, I think this has been a good dialogue, and I think it's informative for everyone on. I hope it is anyway. I do want to just kind of swing back a little and loop in our planning and zoning director, Jim Went, and our chairperson, Matt Wagner. And I just want to, listen, they deal with this all day long. They deal with this applications. And again, I'm going to go back to what I said. I don't know why there's any zoning bills being proposed when the 8-30G bill needs modification. It needs it. We see it every day, every single day here in town. And it could have been, believe me, I worked on this for 9 years with Tony. It could have been modified in a way that would actually allow us to have the chance to build more affordable housing without all this predatory development. It really could have. And we missed a lot of chances over the last 9 years, and because we didn't have the votes. But I want to ask our two planning and zoning local people. I mean, you want to speak a little bit about how we're trying to comply with these 8-30G bills? And do you honestly think we need any additional zoning bills coming at us in the town of Fairfield that would be beneficial to our community?
So thanks very much. And thank you to all my fellow panelists for the spirited debate and information. It's very much appreciated. So 830G has, we've seen some pretty remarkable effects of the statute in our town. Large developments on parcels of land that were not intended to be developed in that fashion. The biggest problem to me with the statute is that in 40 years, those are simply going to be market rate apartment buildings. They're no longer going to be affordable housing. You know, the premise for much of the activity that we've seen in the legislature, it has been to help those who have been disenfranchised over the last generations. A remarkable agenda which I support, supporting those who have been disenfranchised over the years. But these bills do not have that effect. Designing affordable housing, density for density's sake, to provide an opportunity for those who've been disenfranchised to simply rent apartments in places where they would like to live, doesn't help them in the long run to develop equity in real property and use that to their advantage and build intergenerational wealth. So to that end, these bills are misguided. What would help in that regard is subsidies and banking reform to provide opportunities for those who've been disenfranchised over the generations to actually purchase land and homes and build equity the way that I have heard talked about. So the fair share, I mean, I don't know whether you want me to talk about the individual bills or come back to 830G, but the fair share bill.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think, I mean, both, I want Jim to jump in too. I mean, how do you think these are going to impact us in our town?
The fair share bill is simply untenable. In its first iteration, the calculations required that we build 4,300 new affordable units. We only have 22,000 housing units in town. I mean, it was about 20 to 25%. It was amended, and the new calculations would have required 2,300. Then it would require the town to identify the specific parcels which would be developed to achieve that goal. And it placed the burden on the town to develop a plan that articulated a, quote, reasonable opportunity for those parcels to be developed and for them to be, deemed affordable. It's entirely unworkable. It created a private right of action for an aggrieved party to then file a lawsuit against the town in the Superior Court in Hartford. It created a jurisdiction for those lawsuits in Hartford, and that would provide a vehicle for an aggrieved party to challenge the plan that the town put forth. By the same token, in order for the town to establish that it had met the burden, the town would have to file suit for declaratory judgment in that same court in Hartford, and for a judge to sit in judgment of another municipality's plan. And so all of the resources devoted to trying to achieve this sort of vague and ambiguous goal of a reasonable opportunity to achieve the build out of specific parcels that, by the way, are private land. You know, the town doesn't own land that can be developed into 2,300. We're not developers. And so all of that would, in my opinion, be a wasted effort, result in years upon years of litigation, costing the town and individuals incredible amounts of money, all to an end which we really don't understand. Okay, so I am extremely opposed to that bill and to that that calculus and that agenda extremely. I would agree with you that the what's been the 1024 has largely been remediated. Look, the town of Fairfield largely complies with most of the requirements of that bill today. You know, as Mr. Barnhart, I thought did a nice job of summarizing the work that we've done over the years.
Can everybody mute their phones if they're not speaking? Thank you.
That we've done such a really great job, if I may pat our local delegation on the back, of promoting the development of affordable housing in so many different ways. Most recently through the ADU regulations, but we've created the overlays, the inclusive zoning. We created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. As Mr. Barnhart said, we were one of the, maybe the first, not the first, one of the first towns to actually have an affordable housing plan in place. And we are doing the hard work. And that is why it is so offensive for those at the state level to dictate to all towns this sort of, as you've characterized, one size fits all. And so, you know, yes, I can sit here and say, I've reviewed the bills. I reviewed 1024. We largely comply with all those requirements, but to that end, you know, it's unnecessary. I agree with the bill requiring, I agree with the concept of the bill requiring an educational component for commissioners on town plan and zoning bodies. Look, we are a quasi-judicial body. We have real impact on the lives and the dollars of our citizens and the people that we represent. When we make decisions about land use, it impacts people's families and their pocketbooks and their investments and so forth. You know, we hear and receive evidence and witnesses, cross-examination and the like. And so it is really important that we get it as right as we can. And when you have lay people on these bodies that don't understand the process, that don't understand the law, don't understand how case law impacts our decisions, don't understand the appellate process and the judicial process of how things get appealed, and even how to put in their evidence. You have, you know, so I think it's important that there be a component of education for commissioners, but it needs to be tweaked. I'm a lawyer. I'm already subject to continuing legal education. I've been doing this I've been on the commission for over 10 years. I've been chair for, I don't even know, 6 or 7 years. You know, I'm already sitting in classes and having my credits, and to some degree that involves land use. I'm not opposed to a refresher or recertification, but there should be some baseline of qualification for folks to sit on a zoning board. So I'm generally in agreement with that. So I'll kind of stop there. You know, I think I touched on the biggies. You know, but we're almost there. If everything that we have approved is built, we will have enough points under 830G to achieve a moratorium. I do think that 830G has had incredibly unintended consequences, especially for municipalities like Fairfield, where there is you know, limited amount of developable land, where we have some densely populated areas around the transit-oriented districts and the like. And I think when you look at the complex, the complexion of the rest of the state, that 830G could have good consequences, where there is land that can be developed and where developers can get a reprieve from local zoning restrictions, where those might not make a whole lot of sense. So that's my 2 cents on the issues we've been talking about.
Thank you, Matt. Jim, do you want to jump in at all and offer any your perspective?
I don't have anything to add to what Mr. Wagner already articulated with respect to the pending bills. I just want to go back and put a little order of magnitude on the number of dwelling units we're talking about. And when Mark discussed earlier the progress we're making towards a moratorium in what we've seen in developments with respect to 8-30G applications in particular in Fairfield. There have been 13 developments that have been authorized, totaling 477 total units, with 214 of those being affordable units. Of those projects, roughly half of those are complete in terms of number of projects. 168 total dwelling units constructed, with 110 of those being affordable units. So we are creating a number of units. And then with respect to the inclusionary zoning provision that was adopted in 2015, there's been 7 developments totaling 892 dwelling units, 91 of those affordable. Of those projects, 367 units are completed or nearly complete, with 38 of those affordable. So that's for a community of our size with the number of dwelling units that we have, that's a lot of dwelling unit production in a fairly compressed period of time. So we are approaching, and there are some approvals that haven't been implemented yet that would put us over the count to allow us to achieve moratorium status. So I just wanted to kind of put the number of units out there, but yet it's true that until those units are built and occupied, we can't make that application for moratorium. And so there are additional applications lined up in the queue for consideration. So it is, that's really all I have at this point.
Thank you, Jim. That is helpful. So I do want us to continue the dialogue on some of these bills, but I'm just going to go back and say that listen, when I served in the legislature with you guys, I know the deal. And when bills would come up or language would change, I would be running back to the caucus room or even outside of the hall of the House. And I would be on the phone with the chief of police, or it'd say, hey, here's a bill, that just changed the language. What do you think? Or I'd be on the phone with Mark Barnhart as a legislator, or I'd call the fire chief. Because, it's important that I think what our community wants is our legislators to remember that, to check in here with us, me, with Mark, with Jim, with any of our people who are dealing with this day in and day out before we sign off on any legislation, because, this stuff is having a serious impact on our town. I mean, a real impact. And I think what's happened here is gotten into this discussion about people who care about affordable housing and people who don't. And I don't think that's the discussion, because I think we all want people to live and have an ability to live in affordable housing. But when predatory developers completely take over charge of well-intended legislation, that's the real consequence. And we've seen it. We've all seen it up close and personal. So I think that's the ask from me. And I would think that's the ask from our entire community is, listen, I know what it can be like to be up there, and it's crazy and things are happening and legislation is flying around. But, I'm going to go back and say, except for the training, and I think the language needs to be reviewed very closely before anybody votes on it, because somebody end up taking a lot of training. But I agree training is important, but I just don't see how our town can take another mandate on zoning changes. I just don't see how we can.
If I could jump in and just adding to what you were saying about sort of how things work in Hartford and why it is so important that you're hosting this forum tonight. And there are so many people that are listening and engaged, and I hope this is available to our community afterwards. There is a lot of stuff flying around in the legislature, and a lot of it is not good. And the reality is we're going to be in session. The House is going in session tomorrow at 10:30. I don't even have a go list yet. We don't even know what we're voting on. So to your point that things are going to come up, they're going to get called, and we may see new language for the first time. We may need to reach out. And that's why there are rallies happening around when there are important issues. We did this with tolls, right? You've got to get the attention of people outside the Gold Dome because everybody's busy living their lives. They're going to work, they're taking care of their kids, they're doing whatever else you do in normal life and not paying attention to what's happening out of Hartford. And it's really difficult to get news from Hartford out into our community. So I, again, thank you for doing this, but yeah, stay aware. The CGA website is good. Reach out to any of us along the way, and we will certainly be sharing as, important issues continue to come up, but it happens fast.
So I'm going to put the onus on the legislators here. I know I used to say it too, reach out to me and let me know how you think, but actually I'm going to put it on all of you. You got to reach out to us and let us know what is happening and ask our opinion before you cast a vote on anything that's going to put our town in a tough position.
So, Madam First Selectwoman,
Tony, you're on mute.
I'm hearing that my connection.
I feel like Senator Casano, planning and development. No, I appreciate that, Brenda, and I appreciate that your perspective as a legislator and as a town leader is important. And ultimately, we want to hear from all of you because the premise for us is we are your representatives. We should represent your voice. And if we don't engage and represent your voice, you need to know that. So ultimately, we want to hear from you. And that's part of the process. Transparency, accountability, and visibility is important. But this is such an important meeting, Madam First Selectwoman. It's important. And I will leave on this note that we are so fortunate in the town of Fairfield to have the Affordable Housing Task Force, advocates that are involved in the community. And one thing we didn't even get to were significant concerns in regards for us as a coastal community and the environmental impact in regards to watershed protection, as well as the increased capacity in sewer and alternative septic treatment systems that will have a dramatic impact to facilitate increased density. Look, there is a cause and effect in many of these policy implementations. We don't sit in a vacuum. And we need to be very conscious. The environmental concerns are extremely important to me as well. And I don't think we've done enough to do justice to what increased density has facilitated or could potentially cause.
So, Madam
but we need to hear from everyone.
So I want to give everybody, I want to give everybody a chance to talk. And Laura and Cristin and Tony, Jennifer, you haven't really, they've kind of
well, I think there's
talked a little. Maybe you want to jump in a little, Jen, and talk about what you might think about some of this stuff.
I think Cristin was saying something, but I'm happy to speak after that.
Okay.
Madam First Selectwoman, if I could just respond, I think, just in this conversation, you're getting a flavor of some of the intensity around this conversation. So I've heard now from at least two folks on this call that, why should we do anything now? We need to be able to properly plan for our future. There are tools within some of these proposals that will help our communities properly plan for our future. I will give an example. Mr. Wagner referenced case law. The ability to have our inclusionary zone here in Fairfield, that's from case law. One of the bills actually proposes codifying that into statute so that communities are clear, and the zoning enabling statute has clear language and makes explicit to communities not like Fairfield, who knows but that those are in there. In terms of environmental concerns, some of the proposals actually further specify and clarify the need to consider the impact of proposed developments on the Long Island Sound. And it gets more specific about the language and what needs to be considered. It also includes the navigable waterways that feed into those, into the sound. So there's actually additional language there that does that. There's language in one of the 8-2 sections that expands the energy and water conservation tools that now, those are some of the things it does. There's a proposal that would allow towns to decide to write regulations to be able to have technical fees for technical consultants who, if you have a developer coming in and you have a neighborhood group, and if the commission decides they want to have their own neutral opinion, and again, that would be up to the communities. There's another tool that would allow communities, again, this is permissive, it's not required, to use a vehicle miles traveled as opposed to level of service for traffic determinations and for figuring out what kinds of things we want to ask the bus stops or bike racks or things like that. And I think the other thing that specifically 1024 provides is a model code working group, which if a community chose to adopt, they could do so, but they would not have to then create them on their own. 169 communities would not have to create model form-based codes. That working group would do so, and then a municipality and a community would have the opportunity to adopt them on their own. I think it's really important for us to focus in, and I really, I again appreciate the time Mr. Wagner spent with me. I know our planning office folks have been very generous as well. And I welcome the opportunity to talk individually with any member of the delegation. I encourage it, and with you, Madam First Selectwoman. I'm interested in looking at the specific pieces of the proposal and how we can address those concerns that people have. I will say, I go back to what Rep. Devlin said about parking. This is one area that I think we have had conversation about. Excuse me. Just to be clear, the parking requirements that are in 1024 are related to dwelling units, not to like the library, where I think everyone does look for more parking, and hopefully we can get more people there. But specifically, I think it's good and helpful to look at what those different aspects of the bill are, and I will continue to remain in conversation about those.
Jen, did you want to you haven't had much of a chance. You want to jump in?
I just want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with you that we need to be engaging in conversation with our community. And I have been doing that since the day after the election. I've been talking with neighbors. I've been talking with other people here on this forum who work in town hall. I had about a month ago my own zoning forum where we went through the details of many of these bills, and actually shared many opinions that Mr. Wagner just shared. And I think it's really helpful if we could be speaking in details about these bills, because we all know how Fairfield's been impacted by 830G and how wildly unpopular it is in our community. And we really have been a community particularly and disproportionately hard hit by that legislation. And that those feelings are clearly and understandably spilling over into this conversation as well. And to your point, Madam First Selectwoman, like, how could we possibly be talking about anything else in regards to zoning with that still out there? And the approach that I've had is, for nearly a decade, you guys fought tooth and nail to try to get 830G amended or repealed, and that didn't happen. There weren't the votes. So I have viewed this process, this session, as our opportunity to go through what could be a viable replacement, because I don't think we're going to get rid of 830G without a viable replacement. Now, I don't want anyone to think that I think we have before us the viable replacement, but I do think that this is the process where all the stakeholders come together and try to figure out what could be the viable replacement. And I don't think fair share is it, as I shared in my forum about a month ago, but there are elements there that I think are intriguing. Instead of putting the burden on the private sector and the developers, it puts it a little bit more on the town, where we would get to choose our sites. And as Mr. Wagner said, we've done a really good job of creating overlay zones. We already have B and C zones that allow as of right multifamily housing. We could be potentially finding ways to drive development there. 6611 fair share doesn't do that yet, but I hope we can continue the conversation. And I also just want to be really clear that all of the proposals before us have taken out the proposed as of right components, and that the committee process was successful. It heard the voices of Connecticut residents and Fairfield residents, and it removed that component, particularly in 1024, where I think there was the greatest concern through the committee process anyways. And so that I hope we can continue to have this conversation and not kick the conversation down the road by saying no to everything and we are going to stop this conversation. That doesn't mean we are going to vote for it necessarily at the end of the day, but I think we need to continue to have a detailed and specific conversation about what parts are not a right fit for Fairfield and why, and how can we get to a place where we are enacting legislation that would be a right fit for Fairfield and for the rest of Connecticut, so that we are no longer disproportionately shouldering the burden of affordable housing.
Thank you, Jen. So I would say to the delegation, all of us having to submit affordable housing plans, right, to the state. I mean, isn't that a fair argument for all of you to make to the majority, to the speaker? Hey, listen, why don't we give towns a chance to send in their affordable housing plans? Let's see how they're doing before we're going to move forward with, and as Jen said, there's some parts that may be good, but why don't we at least give towns a chance to put those plans on the table and then review them with whatever group, Cristin, you were speaking about, a working group, before we were to make, because as we know, once a bill is passed and it's in law, it's almost impossible to get it to stop it.
Can I jump in on that one?
If
Yes.
I may be again excused for a few minutes, we're in a debate on an issue, and I'll come right back. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thanks, Tony.
You're doing your job there. That's the first thing. So, Madam First Selectwoman, I think part of what's happened in the conversation around these bills is 830G and 8-2 have been conflated. And there are many pieces in the 8-2 reorganization and even some of the additions that are not going to be related to a town's affordable housing plan. So I think there are many people who feel like, well, we shouldn't do anything else until we fix 830G. And I would suggest, as you know well, the ability to make amendments to that statute, when we did make the changes, which I did support and voted for and helped to override the governor's veto.
Yep.
There was an agreement among legislators at the time to leave that be for a while. Whether there was an agreement or not, the fact remains that that is a broader conversation that absolutely, I think, should happen. But that does not preclude us from doing some of the basic things in 6107 in particular, which are to reorganize the zoning statute. That's not about advantaging developers or about advantaging people who want to make money. This is about helping to plan for our future. And I think one thing that's really important that every one of us has said is we know that we need to plan for our future. We know that we are going to need to have places where people live. And I also am very much listening, not just to my constituents, people around the state, but definitely to my constituents. And there are plenty of folks who I've heard from who are begging for more diversity of housing stock. And we've got market forces that's part of what's happening here, 830G or not. We are seeing people paying rents for 2-bedroom apartments in Fairfield far exceed the mortgage I pay on my single family home. And that's because they want to live here because this is such a great community. But when we look at that 8-2, those 8-2 pieces, we haven't talked a lot about accessory dwelling units. And I just give a lot of credit to our town for coming up with regulations. And indeed, there's not an exact match. You know, the 1024 language goes a little bit farther in some ways and actually doesn't go as far in other ways, which is interesting, right? Because in some ways we're ahead, our town is ahead of what that statute suggests, but in others, Matt, I see Matt, I can actually see you on my screen. Do you want to jump into that? Because I'd love to talk about some of the substances.
I'm kind of biting my tongue on so many places, but right there, I have to react to something you just said about how 1024 has provisions for ADUs that are slightly different, right, than how we have decided to do it. In some ways goes a little bit further, but in other ways not as far. We spent a lot of time developing our ADU regulations, and we as a community decided to enact what we believed will work for our town. And the point, I think, of this entire exercise is to communicate to you and others in Hartford that is the role of the municipality and local home rule, to enact regulations that provide for the opportunities for these kinds of dwelling units on terms that the community believes will work for it, and the way that the community would like to see its land developed and its dwelling units developed. And it's not the same as another community in upstate Connecticut might decide that they want to see that happen. And so rather than dictate the regulations around which communities must have ADU regulations, there should be a requirement that there be ADU regulations. It's proscriptive. And that, I think, is the general objection, right? And so it's my understanding that if those provisions of 1024 pass, we would comply in material respects. There would also be some aspects that we would have to change. And quite frankly, given the success that we've seen over the years in that regard, that's the flavor you're getting. It's not appropriate, right? That's why we object.
And I think what Matt is saying is we don't want to be dictated by Hartford in our own community.
Think about it this way. Think about it more in terms of the Limited Liabilities Company Act. So we have, as a state law, model rules or a model operating agreement that is in place as a default mechanism when you organize a limited liability company. Now, it's a baseline. You can choose to adopt your own operating agreement for your limited liability company. But if you don't, then these baseline rules apply. You don't even have to have all of them in your operating agreement. But if you just flat out don't have one, then those are the rules that apply. I can understand there being a requirement that each town have an affordable housing plan. We comply with that. But don't tell us exactly what you think we need to have in our affordable housing plan.
Well, none of the bills currently have that contemplated, and the 830J provision was voted into law previously. But just talking about the ADUs for a moment. And by the way, I think that was a wonderful conversation that happened here in Fairfield. But specifically, here are a couple things that the state proposal, or one of the bill's proposals, talks about something that happens in communities around the state, which is a requirement that only those who are related to you can live in an accessory dwelling unit, for example. So that would be one of the changes. Here in Fairfield, some folks are able to have a detached accessory dwelling unit, but not all folks are. So I talked earlier you know, in terms of those individual property rights and what's looser or more strict, right? And I have to say, again, I respect the process that the committee, the TP&Z went through. But in some places in our town, if you have a larger lot, you're able to have that detached dwelling unit, whereas in some places in town with the smaller lots, you're not able to. But Mr. Wagner, I don't disagree with the fact that you're saying, yes, there would be changes. There are two, I think specifically two places in the proposals as they stand today where the accessory dwelling units and the parking pieces that are more prescriptive, I would suggest. I think the other pieces, for the most part of the bill, are not prescriptive in the same way. I think although there are things, some other kind of the nitty gritty, as I say, that would require zoning enforcement officials to be certified, that would ask the water pollution control authorities to include in their plans forward thinking about where there might be multifamily development or density of development down the road for a community. Those are, you know, planning features. So there are a lot of different pieces to it.
Yeah. The other point I'd like to make expressly is that, and this really goes in response to Representative Leeper's comments. These bills are not designed to be a replacement for 830G. That's not my understanding. 830G is not going away anytime soon. So even if these were passed and put into motion, it is not my understanding that we would be relieved from any obligations under 830G. And that's why it's part of the
I did want to
conversation.
also comment
You are
to
correct on that,
Cristin,
Matt.
talking about, you know, our vote on amending and the work that, you know, Tony and I did on the housing committee. But that's a sunset. That bill, those changes are sunsetting, which means all that hard work, overriding the veto by Governor Malone, and that thing is sunsetting,
When?
5-year sunset. So, you know, being able to count our seniors, which, you know, count as a half a point in the prior, and now get to count as a full point under the work we did if it's tied to a family dwelling. That goes away. So it reverts right back. And I think
Absolutely, and I do want to take a moment.
Point, that 8-30G. Now, listen, I don't know if somebody, if Representative Leeper heard somebody say that, you know, if we pass some of these bills, magically they're going to repeal 8-30G. I don't know, but I fought pretty hard for 9 years. I don't think anybody's touching that.
So I'll happily respond to that. So part of my job is to also advocate for the change I want to see, right? And so I don't think that I could support these legislations without that. And I don't think that's necessarily going to happen this session. But having this conversation so that we can actually meaningfully tackle 830G with proposed solutions is, for me, what a part of this conversation is for. I in no way meant to imply that these were some sort of magical replacement, but I think this is the conversation about tactical policy proposals that could be an effective and viable replacement for 830G down the road. And knowing that sunset is approaching, we might have a unique window to re-engage in exactly that conversation.
And I appreciate that, Representative Leeper, and perhaps you, myself, and First Selectwoman Kupchick, I did call you Rep again, should talk about our experience. If you truly are looking to make changes in 830G, you're talking to two individuals right now that were on the forefront in a bipartisan basis with the co-chairs of Democratic Senator former Schlossberg and House Member Larry Butler. We did it and we had the experience. So if you truly wanted to do something in that, you have two individuals that went through the battle and have battle scars to show for it. We'd be happy to do that. But ultimately, to answer Matt's question, all of these proposals on Senate Bill Fair Share 6611, Senate Bill 1024, and House Bill 6107, all of these proposed changes will be possibly in place in addition to the existing requirements of 830G. So it is clear to answer, we're not touching 830G, and the burden on our municipalities and the leaders that have demonstrated tremendous vision, tremendous initiative, and it doesn't just go back to present. People need to understand 830G does not account for housing that was built pre-1990. We have Sullivan McKinney, we have Parish Court. These were incredible initiatives. That Operation Hope was one of the first privately funded homeless shelter in Connecticut. Those issues don't get raised. And I'd be remiss if I didn't address some of the potential attacks and challenges of community and intent. Look, as a racial minority and an immigrant who loves this country, opportunity in housing is critical. To assign the motive that Fairfield does not do enough in its exclusionary practices and to have a tone of not doing right by social equality is a false premise. It is an idea that puts the conversation aside to not and ignore the incredible efforts that have been undertaken in the history of this town and currently. So I want to put that out from the standpoint that as a racial minority who lived in a federal housing project that understands that housing is a critical, essential building block for anyone pursuing the American dream, I will always be supportive of solutions that incorporate viable, sustainable solutions that addresses the problem, not a top-down one-size-fits-all. So I am very eager to work in a collaborative manner with all the advocates that may think that I'm the devil on one side of the debate. So I am more than happy to go to work to find that we have an issue we need to address, but incorporate in an earnest and genuine opportunity for all shareholders with disparate and disagreeing viewpoints to find solutions that are viable and sustainable. So I felt it was important to point that out because there may be people that may be cowered into a position where opposing these kind of premises that have irreparable impact in our communities throughout the entire state because of the tone of the current climate. Look, no one is ever discounting it. Social quality, access, and opportunity should be available for every group. We are working toward that. These solutions that are being offered only increase density. They don't solve the critical need for affordable, accessible, and diverse housing in every community in our state, not just the suburbs.
So let me just jump in for a minute because Mark
requiring density. I think it's really important to note that though. There's not, we removed the section of the bill that had the multifamily development.
It bears repeating though, because as we've heard many times, those types of things find their way back into the bills. And so it's very worthwhile to talk about it.
Mark Barnhart has to leave because he has to go to another affordable housing meeting because this is what we do now in our town. Post affordable housing 8-30G meetings because our town is so aggravated and frustrated being dictated by people who don't live here. And so I just wanted to say Mark has to depart. and listen, I know that, and Laura actually has a commitment as well. Listen, this is very emotional. And I like I said at the beginning of the forum, we all have different opinions. I don't think there's a right or wrong here. I think what people are concerned about in our community is that we want to have control over our own town. We don't want to be told what to do. And frankly, groups that say that are titled Desegregate Connecticut, you know, it's just so negative. And honestly, I feel like there's all these camps now, and here we are in our little town, well, it's not so little anymore, trying to manage and comply with all of the things, not just the mandates on zoning, the mandates on education, the mandates on this, the mandates on that. There's so many mandates. I just think what we're asking here, I'm asking, as the first select woman, and I think our community is asking, is please touch base with us, even if it's a call at 12 o'clock at night from outside the hall of the house to say, hey, first select woman, here's the language now. What do you think? Mr. Barnhart, you'll pick up the phone at midnight, right? What do you think about this language?
You know, I'm
Because,
24/7.
I mean, I used to take pictures of bill language and send it to our local people to, hey, what do you think? Because, you know, at the end of the day, you represent this community and we're the ones that have to actually manage the community. And there's a very, very different thing about being a legislator and passing bills that you like and actually then having to be here implementing it. So that's all I think I'm asking the people who work for our town, Mark, Jim Went, and people who are elected like Matt Wagner, who have to deal with this all the time is in our community, just asking that that we be kept up to date on these changes because we know they can change really quickly.
And Madam First Selectwoman, to that end, I'm happy to come meet with you on Friday after we get back from session and talk through any part of the bill language that you want. Same thing to any delegation member as well. I do just want to reiterate the conversation around the required density and to Mr. Wagner's point that we should still be talking about these things because things make their way back into bills. I removed those sections.
That's great. Thank you very much. I would just ask
not
you
going
to
to be
pay
bringing it
attention
back.
to how it would affect Fairfield. Nobody had any idea how 830G was going to impact Fairfield 30 years later.
Right.
Okay? And we don't know the impact of fair share, how that's going to impact Fairfield 20 years from now. All right? We've been given, and I've lived with, a regime of a statutory construction that we now have experience with.
Right.
We now know the dictates we need to work within, and we're working towards those points and so on and so forth. To change the rules of the game on our municipality and all the others at this late stage would be devastating. And doing that in a way with a bill, with legislation, that you have no idea how that is going to impact our community or any other community, I think is just, it's not right. And shouldn't be tolerated. Shouldn't be tolerated by you or anybody else.
Thank you all. I'm sorry I have to
Thank
leave.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm sorry you have
Mark.
another meeting.
We can all take a deep breath on June 10th.
Hopefully.
Exhale on June
And
10th.
actually,
Hopefully.
Madam First Selectwoman, if I may, I know this is a zoning forum, but the place I was planning to head tonight is the Connecticut State PTA, and I will just give a shout out to one of our former central office folks who's now the superintendent of Milford, who's receiving the award, and Paul Cavana, our own Fairfield Ward, I can't even speak, is receiving an award as well as Ms. Raffioso, a teacher award. So congrats to them. Since I'm not there with them, I'll give them a shout out here on FairTV.
And please, I would also offer my congratulations and gratitude for all of our teachers. And it's been a difficult year and they have done incredible work. And I want to give a shout out to obviously Superintendent Cummings and the entire teaching advocacy. And I wish, you know, I could have gone as well, but we're up in Hartford doing the people's work.
Well, I just want to say I really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. Our residents are calling and emailing so much and about all of this. And I think this is a very helpful and welcome bit of information where I can now share this when people email or call the office just so they can hear the dialogue. I know we didn't get a chance to talk a lot about 8-30G, but I do have other links on the FairTV where I have had just sole conversations about that legislation that I can share with the community who maybe hadn't heard that before. And of course, you're all always available to our residents to talk about that. So I hope everybody had a chance to learn something today. And thank you, everyone, for participating. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam First Selectwoman. Now, this is going to be public
Thank you.
record that we could share broadly
It's
from a transparency point. So thank you.
Recorded on FairTV, and Jerry usually puts it up like the next day.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And just for anyone who didn't get a chance to have their questions answered, you can email me, bkupchick@fairfieldct.org. I can send you the legislators' information, or we can try to answer any other questions you have. Matt, did you want to say
Thank
something,
you.
Matt?
I just want to say thank you, Madam Selectwoman Kupchick, and all of my fellow panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt.
Thanks.